a business is not paper, laptops, pencils, iPads, spreadsheets, Word documents. It's people. People are doing the work. And you have to understand the different dynamics that come with people doing that work, coming together to do work. And they're not robots.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Celeste Warren, who's a Global Chief Diversity Officer at Merck and author of the book, How to Be a Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador. During the episode, Celeste shares how to become aware of your strengths, weaknesses, conscious and unconscious biases. And she also shares how to take inventory of your surroundings and how to develop a personal action plan. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Celeste, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am doing well, Chris. Thank you for the invitation.
It's nice to see you. I feel like I've been stalking you on LinkedIn for so many years.
That's okay.
And now you've got it's never always sounds strange to our listeners, but I'm always following different leaders in the space, and I've always seen you always been quite active at giving back to the community, sharing, whether that events, other social things as well. And I always follow that as well. And now the book as well. So I was like, oh, here we go. The book's come out as well. Tell everyone a bit more about the book and kind of what was the inspiration behind it.
Yes, I was actually stalked by BK Publishers, Barrett Kohler Publishing. They had written to me an email, kind of a soft stalking, probably starting in like 2019. He just sent me an email and said, hey, you think you would be interested in submitting a proposal for a book? And I was like, no, I don't, what would anybody want to hear me say? It wasn't of interest to me. And at that point in time, and they said, okay, well, we'll just keep in touch, and they did. Every 5, 6, 7 months or so, they'd send me another email. And I would always say, no, not really interested right now. It's not the right time. And then the pandemic hit, and they reached out to me and said, well, what about now? And, it was kind of quiet, and, we weren't going anywhere, weren't doing anything except working from 9 to 5 or in our jobs, looking into our cameras. And so that seemed like the right time. And so they started sort of counseling me through the proposal process and going from a concept to all the way to the proposal and presenting to their board. And so we came up with this idea about how everyone can be a diversity inclusion ambassador. So something that would appeal to everyone, to empower them to be able to be a change agent. And that's kind of how it sort of surfaced. And the reason why I wanted to focus on that was because whenever I spoke, either internally or externally at different conferences, inevitably there would always be at least one person that would come up to me and say, well, Celeste, that's great. You're in this nice position, and I'm not a manager. I'm not a C-suite leader. I'm not in diversity and inclusion. I don't know how I can impact change. I don't know what I can do. And so it would always it would really hit me right here because there was such a lack of, empowerment that was going on across the world for a large percentage of people. And that hurt me because it was like, why can't they feel like that they are empowered to impact change? And so that's kind of the vision of the book, and then going all the way through to writing it. And I was, elated when because they tap you on the shoulder and they email you and say, hey, would you be interested? Doesn't mean that your book's going to be picked up, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so I heard back from them saying, yes, and Celeste, we want you to know the impact of this. We get thousands and thousands and thousands of pitches a day, a year. And we only pick 50 books to publish every year.
Really? Just 50?
And wow. When they told me that, and it was funny because he didn't tell me until after we got the thumbs up, because if he had told me before, I would have just said,
what's the point?
I'm not going to get it.
Yeah, you're like, what's the point
in doing this?
Oh, amazing. I love the point that you made, by the way, there. And I wanted to emphasize that for a second of everyone's role in helping. And that's the byline, right? Everyone's role in helping all feel accepted, engaged, and valued. And I'll be honest, as a white male, for the longest time, I thought like, I can't see where I fit into this, how I can impact. This doesn't relate to me at all. But obviously being in a interracial relationship and growing up where I grew up in East London, where it was very multicultural, it made more sense to me, especially now I see it in my life. You know, I've got a mixed race daughter. I see, there's moments now where I'll give you an example, right? Not a great one, but I mean, Tasha went to pick up Robin from nursery one day and she had to prove that she was Robin's mum because Robin's very light skinned. And I was like, this is the most craziest thing I've ever witnessed. And I had the same thing. One day I went to pick up Robin and I had to prove that I was her dad. And they were like, and I was like, this is, or more recently, Tasha was kind of passed on a promotion because her manager said, I was doing you a favor because I didn't think, with Robin and you being a mum that you'd want to take on more work. Crazy. Right. So,
but that stuff exists.
Yeah,
it really does exist. And it's so funny, Chris, that you say that, you being in London, right? Because in the United States, racism, all of that stuff everyone knows about it, et cetera. But when I was starting out in this job 8 years ago, and I would travel to different countries, I would talk to them about diversity and inclusion, and they would be like, oh, that's a US concept. We don't have those problems.
Oh, really?
The same problems here. Oh, yeah. And I would say, well, wait a minute. Every country has the haves and the have-nots. And you just have to define what that is. And, fast forward to today where, we have a lot of acknowledgement about the challenges around diversity, equity, and inclusion globally. But yeah, I can remember having those discussions with my colleagues in all different countries, saying that, well, diversity inclusion, that's a US concept. We don't have those types of problems here. And inevitably it was the white male who was telling you that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. Right. Completely oblivious as well. And I think even, I've said this before on the podcast, but even Natasha at times had to call me out, and it's been uncomfortable. But for example, during the George Floyd situation, she came to me and said, I'm really disappointed in you that you haven't put more content out and to share your, because I'm sharing my opinion with her at home. And she's like, well, why are you not sharing that online? And I kind of had to take a step back and be like, why am I not doing that? And it really was the fear of like, do people even care about my opinion? Will it come across, I don't want it to come across wrong. Like, I'm worried about what people may think, and I just kind of negged myself out about it where I was like, okay, I'm not gonna put anything out there. And she's like, that's the biggest problem. That's the worst thing you can do. So she called me out on that, and I was like, you're right. Like, but I'm sure like many other people probably feel the same way as me, and that's why they haven't put it out there, right? So like, there's been many, and there's been other moments like that, right?
Well, that's what's going on now, Chris. The movement of diversity, equity, and inclusion is causing many white males to sort of just pull back and say, well, I don't know if it's for me. And back in 2018, I was talking to a lot of folks, and that was sort of the sentiment of many white males across different areas I spoke, and I would tell them that everybody has to have a role to play. You can't feel like you're not a part of it. And what I did was I brought in a speaker. He's Kenji Yoshino. He's with New York University School of Law, and he's the leader of their Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And he had just created this training on uncovering talent. And the premise of it is that everyone covers when they come into work, whether that be a mom who doesn't like to tell people she has to leave early because her kid's sick and came home from school, or someone who's gay and they don't want to tell it, they don't want to come out, or anything. And even white males cover. in fact, the research says it was between, I think it was 50 and 60% of white males cover when they come into work. And that could be something as what we would consider silly as, well, I don't like soccer and I don't like sports. And so when I come into work on Monday, everybody's talking about the big game and I don't watch it. And so I just sort of pretend that I do so I can get along, or I don't follow politics, or I'm a single dad and I have to do certain things. I have to leave early or whatever. And I feel like I have to cover when I come into work. And so I brought Kenji into our organization and he conducted some training. And then I also had, we created e-learning so we could get it out across the globe. And I tell you, that was by far the biggest response that I got from white males on anything that we have done was that training, uncovering talent. And to this day, we still have it in our arsenal.
What does that consist of? What does that consist of, the training? Like, what happened?
What he basically is, he gives you the research first. It says everyone covers when they come into work. So you understand that everybody's sort of on the same playing field when it comes based on why they cover. And then he gives you strategies for how you should not allow that if you're in a position of power or manager or whatever in the workplace. And he gives you strategies to uncover talent. That's why it's called uncovering talent. And then, it really helps individuals who feel that way to help them to understand that everybody goes through this, but here are some things that you should do to uncover your talent as well. And it was very, very, it brought everybody under the umbrella of diversity and inclusion and allowed them to understand. And then also moving forward to this past year, what we're seeing is the work of equity that we've been doing for eons, but now everyone sort of asks the question, well, what's equity and why is it different from equality? And I like to say, that illustration of the three people who are standing on the rocks and they're looking over the fence. One person still can't see, they all have one rock. And then the second illustration, the person on the right has three rocks, the person in the middle has two, and the person on the left still has that one rock. Well, the acts of equity are those rocks that we put in place so everyone can see over the fence. And the fence, in my analogy, is all of the isms: racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. And so we have to do both. We have to tear down the institutional isms that exist, that fence. At the same time, though, because that's a longer process. We have to put those rocks in place, the acts of equity, to get to that third illustration where the rocks are gone, the fence is gone, and everybody can see the mountains. But what's happening, we're not at that third illustration yet. We're at that second one. And the person who was standing on one rock in the first illustration and is still standing on one rock in the second illustration, they're looking to their right and they're saying, well, how come they have three rocks and they have two rocks and I only have one? And they don't understand that the fence is there because they've always been able to see over the fence. They've not experienced
so interesting,
the isms. And so we have to basically meet them where they are and say, help them to understand that the fence is there. And then help them to understand what that looks like, how it manifests itself to the person on the far right and the person in the middle. And then not just the education and awareness, but also getting them to be allies, active allies in the work and helping us to move to get to that third illustration. That's the kind of work, how that's evolved to, over the past few years.
Yeah. When people ask you, obviously the title of the book's a big thing, right? How to be a diversity and inclusion ambassador. How do you describe that to someone? What is being a D&I ambassador?
Well, I chose the word ambassador because you have to embody diversity and inclusion. First of all, you have to know what it is. You have to understand what it looks like in the workplace, what the act of diversity and being a diversity and inclusion ambassador, what it means. You have to also be a marketer of it. You have to go out and you have to not just understand it and educate, but you have to promote it. You have to understand that you have to be a change agent in this body of work that we're doing. So it's not just sort of saying, oh yeah, I support diversity and inclusion, but you have to actively sort of get in the boat, grab an oar and row with everyone and help us in joining in the work. And that's an ambassador. That's someone who truly believes in what we're doing, understands it, understands how it impacts other people, and is actively marketing it and promoting it and doing the work to get to equality, true equality.
Mm-hmm. Is there a bit, what's the difference between that and being an ally?
Well, an ally is a lot of people, when we say ally, and they look at it as, well, I'm just going to sort of reach down, because it gives you sort of, you're in a position of power,
mm-hmm.
and you're reaching down and you're helping someone who isn't in a position of power. And I like to say that you shouldn't be an ally just for one. And some people equate that to their activities of being an ally are, well, I'm going to understand your plight of a certain community of people. And, I will listen to what's going on. But it's sort of like being a comrade or a friend, or it's not an active ally. And a lot of people, when they say, oh yeah, I'm an ally to Joe, Jane, or Sally, it's, what I ask them, well, what activities are you doing? What are you doing for them?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, oh, well, we go out to lunch periodically and I listen to, and that's more of a mentor.
Yeah.
But an active ally is somebody who, if they're not just an ally to one or an ally to some, they need to be an ally to everyone who identifies differently than they do. And the difference, I think, is an ally is more of someone who actively listens, is empathetic, but they're not necessarily doing all of the work to tear down the fence, and also helping to put rocks in place at the same time.
They're not picking up the oar and rowing in the boat.
Yeah. They're picking up their own oar and in their own boat. Or jet ski.
Jet ski. Yeah, I wanted to ask that question because I notice whenever I ask people that question, I get very different answers to what that means as well. So I wanted to hear your view. So the book, if I'm correct, you broke it down into like 3 kind of chapters, right? Could you kind of outline kind of the process of the book for everyone listening?
Yeah, there's 3 basic steps, and I wanted to make it really, really simple, but yet complex enough where people would be able to understand it. Because you don't want to make it so that they're overwhelmed and feel like that person who came up to me after a conference saying that I can't do it. But I just wanted it to be really pretty simple. And so the first step is basically assess yourself. And we all like to learn about ourselves, right? We like to learn our strengths, our areas of development, our biases. And so the first step is basically understanding that. What are your strengths? What are your skills? What are your capabilities? Very importantly, what are your biases, unconscious biases or otherwise? And getting a handle on that. And then the second thing is, now look around you, look at the environment around you, look at your department, look at your organization, and take an inventory and assess what's getting in the way of it being a more inclusive and diverse environment. And then the third thing is, very importantly, you got to take action, because just doing the assessments without putting together a plan to impact change is just the idea in your head. So the big thing is you have to take action. And so that's basically like kind of the 3 steps. And in the book, I have different personas. So if you're a C-suite leader, or you're a chief diversity officer like myself, or you're in HR, you're a first or second line manager, supervisor, and very importantly, you're an individual contributor, I take all of those personas through those 3 steps and give examples of things that they can be doing.
So let's start with the first one. What are some practical things we can do then to understand our weaknesses, or our unconscious biases? And conscious, because sometimes we're not even aware of that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, you can go online, you can Google, there are different assessments, DE&I assessments that you can go through. I recommend unconscious bias education, and there are lots of different companies that are doing that now. You take your pick of any of them. But one really easy one is what I like to say, if you don't have, if your company doesn't have those resources, or you don't have those resources, sit down with a colleague that you trust and take them out for some coffee or tea and say, I want to better understand how I show up when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And it could be, it's usually someone who sees you, like maybe a peer, a coworker, someone who you trust that's going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want someone who's just going to tell you all the wonderful things that you do. You want someone to tell you how you show up and to give you examples. So for example, if you and I were at lunch, I would say, Chris, we had we were having this discussion at staff the other day, and our boss ignored a comment that I made, and you didn't come, not that you needed to come to my rescue, but you didn't sort of acknowledge the fact that he marginalized me. And you didn't come to me afterwards and say, I noticed that this happened. I didn't know if you wanted me to intervene in the meeting. But how do you feel? And let's talk through it. Should you go back and talk to our boss or et cetera? So like, that's just an example. Mm-hmm. So that's an easy one that anybody can do at any level. And then also too, there's so many articles that you can read about assessments and understanding about your unconscious biases, understanding what types of skills and capabilities that you need in order to be a true ambassador for diversity and inclusion, and understand like the role that you need to be playing and you could be playing. So that's the first thing that you can do. Just Google diversity and inclusion assessments, and you'll just get this laundry list of different stuff that to use to assess yourself. And I always recommend the unconscious bias training, because I'll tell you, Chris, when I first got into this role 8 years ago, I was definitely not the person that you see today. And I hope, 5 years from now, I'm also continuing to evolve, because this is the journey that you're consistently on. But I can remember when I first got in this job as a Black woman, I was like, oh, that's so cliche. Here's the Black woman who's over diversity and inclusion for a company. And when I first got into the role, I sort of put that to the back or to the side and said, I'm going to focus on diversity and inclusion, but I don't want people to think if I'm really pushing for women's rights or the advancement of Blacks, am I going to be perceived as, oh, that's just self-serving because she's a Black woman? Of course she's pushing for advancement of women. Of course she's pushing for the advancement of Blacks. And so I was sort of hesitant to talk openly about it. But I was pushing diversity and inclusion, but I would sort of shy back a little bit on those two aspects of how I identified. And so I just basically, I think I'd been I don't remember how long I'd been in the role, not that long. And I realized that that's not what I needed to do. And I needed to take a step back and be who I was and acknowledge it and live in it and be proud of my identity. Not that I wasn't proud of it, but I was basically saying,
I get it. Yeah.
Am I going to do a disservice to the work that I need to be doing if I do this? And I basically said, you know what? I'm not going to worry about that. And my assessment was my unconscious bias around the fact that I had to sort of put that to the back in order to be able to advance the work that I'm doing. And I realized I don't have to do that. And there's a story that needs to be told, and I can be telling it based on my own experiences as well, in really making sure that we have a more inclusive environment for everyone. But it took me a little bit when I first got in this role, to be able to feel comfortable, if you will, in my own skin, to be able to do that. And once I got past that, I was just, it was like, I'd laugh and say I became this sort of animal, just like, ferociously fighting for diversity and inclusion for everyone, not just everyone who didn't look like me.
It goes back to you saying at the beginning of the conversation about people carrying things into the workplace. That was a perfect example for you, right?
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. And I feel comfortable talking about it, because even after a while I was embarrassed that I was doing that and I didn't talk about it a lot. But I talk about it now because it's a journey that people need to understand about themselves, to understand and really get in touch with yourself. What is going on that is getting in the way of you becoming more of an ambassador.
Yeah.
Understand that, identify what it is, whether it's, like you said, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and then develop your skills, because there's skills and capabilities that you need. People say that, well, I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and think that's all you need. And yes, passion is very, very important, but you, just like any other role that you have in an organization, you need skills and capabilities to be able to do that role effectively. And so it's the same thing with being a change agent when it comes to diversity and inclusion. There are certain skills and capabilities that you need. You need to understand change management, because that's what we're doing. We're changing and evolving the organization and the people in it. And you have to understand different methodologies to be able to do that. You have to have good communication skills. You have to understand organizational savvy. You have to understand, the politics, the unwritten rules. You have to understand about culture. So you need to understand about all of those things. And you also have to have business acumen, because you need to understand what keeps business leaders up at night, so you can understand, okay, what are the interventions in my discipline of diversity and inclusion that will help them to solve some of those business problems and challenges that they're facing. And everybody has to understand that a business is not paper, laptops, pencils, iPads, spreadsheets, Word documents. It's people. People are doing the work. And you have to understand the different dynamics that come with people doing that work, coming together to do work. And they're not robots.
Yeah.
And so there's that impact, and that insight helps you to be a better leader and helps you to get things done through the people that you work with and you serve.
I love that you obviously shared your personal story and journey, and then that's how you've shaped the book. We need to understand ourselves before we can understand others.
Yes.
If I don't understand Chris and my skills, my weaknesses, my unconscious bias, etc., if I can't skip that step.
Yeah.
and then go in and expect others to go on that journey if I haven't gone on that journey myself.
Exactly. Because can you imagine if you have certain biases as a leader or as a manager, and those biases creep into the decisions that you make around people.
Mm-hmm.
It's well, first of all, it's against the law in most countries. And that aside, you inadvertently disparage communities of people. And you may be doing it because, if it's unconscious, you may be doing it inadvertently, but you're still doing it.
Still doing it.
And it may not have been your intent, but it's still happening. And the shadow of a leader, it casts it's a long shadow, and people are impacted. And depending on your organization, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people are impacted by the actions that you have as a leader. And even if you're an individual contributor, you don't manage people, you still have a span of influence, right? We know that there are people within the organization. They're not people managers on a hierarchical pyramid chart, but they're people that are well respected by a lot of employees in the organization, and their span of influence is strong. People that lead employee business resource groups or affinity groups in different organizations. They may not be a people manager, but they have the respect of people across the organization. And so as an individual contributor, you have to be aware of your own biases, because you have cultivated this following of people who respect you.
You mentioned the second part, surroundings. How do you do that in a practical sense? You mentioned taking inventory of your surroundings, and that can get in the way of there being an inclusive environment in organizations. What are some practical ways to do that?
Yeah. One thing that you can do, Chris, is easy example is go on your company's website and look at the images, the photos, and do they portray diversity in, that exists within either your customer base or within your world? Do you see different people of different backgrounds and cultures that are on your website? Does your website have a section around diversity and inclusion? Does it talk about how they cultivate a diverse and inclusive work environment? So that's one thing you can do. What's out there for employees to see, and then also your external, website and pages. What do they portray? I can remember sitting down years ago, and I was in an airport, and I just got through speaking at a conference, and I'm just, going through LinkedIn, and a photo comes up, an article comes up. It was an article, it was a photo that one of the sales managers had had posted, and they posted a picture of their sales team, and the sales team was all white people. There were some males and females, but it wasn't it wasn't a generational difference. I mean, it was just all white males and females, all around the same age, everything. And I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I immediately at the airport got on the horn. I took a screen print of the photo and I sent it to our global communications group. And I said, look, whenever there's 8 or 10 or 12 people, or even 5 or 6 people in a picture, in a photograph, I know this person posted it because they had just they had done some really nice things. I think it was some sales numbers or something. But it's like, you don't want to show a picture that doesn't reflect the diversity that we have in our customer base, in our case, in our patient base. And that like a month later, I was meeting with the entire global communications leadership team, media relations, all of them, and basically saying, look, let me educate you as far as our diversity and inclusion strategy, first of all. And then secondly, why communications plays such a strong role in enabling that strategy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it just was the start of a wonderful partnership that right now you would never see anything like that in any of our imaging externally, or social media pages and things like that. And that's as a result of, again, education, awareness, and then working together to be able to move forward. And that's the action, the third step, which is I could have just sat there and gone, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Or as I did, I screen printed, sent it to my contact at Global Communications, and then followed up with a meeting I said, let's get a meeting on the books with the entire leadership team globally and have this conversation. And so that's the third part of the action. And so that's just one way of, looking at the images. That is a way of assessing or taking an inventory of your organization. Another thing is get your employee handbook. And most of them are online. Nobody actually prints the handbook anymore, but go online and look at some of the people policies, the HR policies, and read them through a lens of diversity and inclusion and say, are they inviting? Is it encompassing? How would I, as a fill in the blank, a diverse employee, feel about this particular policy? Does it relate to me? Do you have policies around diversity, inclusion?
That's true.
Harassment or anti-discrimination or even anti-bullying and, things like that. And do you have a transgender policy? Do you have walk around your workplace and say, just look around and the bathrooms. Do you have gender neutral bathrooms? Do you have, we call them quiet rooms or prayer rooms for people of different faiths? Do you have lactation rooms for moms? That's one thing you can do, just, taking a nice little stroll around your workplace, around the building where you work and looking at it. Does it have accessibility for persons with disabilities? These are some things that you can do, practical things that you can do to take an inventory of your workplace.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what you're talking about, that doesn't require huge sums of investment either, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of times we're thinking about these vast, lofty goals, about focusing on some of these smaller things that really have a big impact. All of those examples that you just shared are really meaningful to those individuals.
Absolutely.
As well. One of the problems that I do have, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, I've seen a lot of companies doing the opposite of what you've described, where they don't have a diverse workforce, but they reflect that on their website. So on their website, it will have a very diverse group of people. And you and I've worked in a company where it's been the case, where I know that like 95% of my sales floor of 800 people are mainly white females and males. Yet on our website, on our LinkedIn, it's they grabbed a few people from each department that fit this narrative, put them in a picture, put that on LinkedIn, put that on their website, and then portray everything you mentioned, and then you kind of walk into the workplace and you're like, or those individuals, and they're like, well, this is what I signed up for. So I see a lot of that happening. I don't know if you're seeing it. I see a lot of that happening.
Chris, that's a great subject that we've been talking about, especially those of us that are in the DE&I space. And how
do you describe that, by the way? What do you when you sit down with other CDOs? What do you call that? Is there a name?
Well, some people call it appropriation, right? They call it, it's cultural misrepresentation is what I call it. And what I like to say is, when I first got in this role, I would say everyone was kind of pointing me to, well, we have to make sure we fill out the external surveys, and we need to make sure that we do all this external. And I said, when I look at some of the things that we do, I need to make sure that our inside voice matches our outside voice.
Yes.
And right now, I'm not feeling that our inside voice matches our outside voice. And so we're going to put a sort of, my focus the first entire year that I was in the role was on the inside voice. It was, what do we need to be doing internally? And then I would feel much better about any of the accolades or recognition that we got. But I wasn't feeling that in the first year and a half that I got in the role. So my focus was specifically internal, what we needed to be doing from the standpoint of creating a more diverse organization, where some of our pain points were, at what levels in the organization, what areas of diversity do we need to focus on, how we need to create more of an inclusive environment around our employees. And then also, too, like, how are we leveraging the diversity of our employees to create a better business model? So how are we integrating DE&I into our business, and then focusing on that first? And then once we did that, we noticed that we had a better story to tell, and we could tell it with examples, and feel free for people to come into our workforce and see what we were.
It's about authentic, as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, people that do that misrepresent their culture externally, they don't want people coming in and walking their halls and talking to employees. They don't want people doing that. And that's where that there's a problem. When you say, come on in, we know we're not perfect. But we know we're on a journey, but we are definitely taking on that journey. Yeah. One of the things that we did to help with that is trying to really make sure that we were transparent at least around our representation in our workforce. And in our ESG progress report, our corporate responsibility report, we have probably the last 15 years or so, we have put our workforce representations in our corporate report. And we were one of the first companies to do that, Fortune 500 companies to do that. And some companies still don't do it, but we have it at various different levels for women globally, and then also in the United States for underrepresented ethnic groups, people of color. And that is again the debate that people are having around transparency.
Yeah.
Because investors, they want to see it now. They want to see what you're doing and how you're creating that diverse and inclusive work environment for your employees, because they know that in this day and age, that's really, really important in being able to retain a workforce and being able to be productive as an organization.
And it's good business.
Yeah.
Too, let's not forget about that. Everything we'll come into, and like you already know, of course, like, it holds you accountable, your leaders, by doing that, yourselves, the organization, the investors, everyone accountable. as well. So that's in terms of what does success look like? How do you measure the progress? What does that look
Well,
like?
I think there's a few ways. There's I call them the foundational elements, and that's truly looking at your workforce and making sure that it is diverse. And it mirrors the diversity, for us, it mirrors the diversity that we see in our patient base globally. We want to see that same diversity in our employee base. And then secondly, so there's, we measure that. And then you also look at, various different statistics around turnover of different groups. You look at advancement of different groups, promotions. You look at who you brought into the organization, so your new hires. And that's information as well that we have in our progress report as well. We look at new hires coming in the organization, promotions within the organization, and then the representation across different levels. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that you do. The second thing in looking at your culture, many organizations are like us. We have what we call a pulse survey, all employee opinion survey, and we do that 2 or 3 times a year, and we look at that survey, and I cut the data by male versus female to say, how do males view our culture versus women, and is there any difference, and where are those differences? And we also cut it by in the United States, race and ethnicity, mm-hmm. and compare it across that. We look at generations in the workplace and see if there's a difference in generations. And we look at it by country and region, and we look at it by level in the organization, C-suite, et cetera. And so there are programs that we've been doing over the past 8 years that have been sort of addressing everyone in the workplace, right? Mm-hmm. And have done a really, really good job. And we continue to offer those and execute on those programs. But there's also comes a time when you really look at the information and say, we have an issue with this community of employees, or we have an issue here, and we have an issue here, where you have to apply a surgical scalpel and get at what that issue is, and then apply interventions in those areas and step up the work that you're doing in those specific areas. And so that's kind of where we are right now. We have the broad-based programs, but we also know that in certain areas we need to focus on. So that's the next thing you need to do. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing that we focus on is what I was talking about before. How are we leveraging DE&I in our business practices? Yeah. So for us in the healthcare and pharmaceuticals, it's getting diversity in our clinical trials. Our marketing strategies. How are we making sure that they are marketing to not just the people who can afford our drugs and our medicines, but all classes of people? How are we making sure that we're thinking about it through a diverse lens? Yeah. And so every organization has to do that, to think about their diverse customer base and make sure their marketing and sales strategies are integrating DE&I so that they are hitting and understand what's getting in the way of those different diverse customers being able to experience what you want them to experience, whatever it is that you sell.
Yeah. That's it.
There's one last piece,
go for it.
Which is, you have to do those things inside your 4 walls of your organization to sustain it and grow diversity and inclusion. But you also have to take the time to look outside and look externally at the world and say, what is it that we as a company, what's our obligation to making the world a better place? What can we do in partnership with other organizations to lock arms and really shape the culture and the business landscape when it comes to DE&I? So I think those are the 4 areas that I think companies really should be looking at.
Yeah. I love that. There's so much. We could do like 1 million shows just for each of those. I love that you mentioned the last one as well, right? Because we saw, there's been a lot of research around this, and most people now, they look to their companies for guidance.
Yes.
And they look to their companies for example, to George Floyd, right?
Yes.
People look to their companies to respond, right, to that. And that sent a clear message to people, right? A good or bad, how they responded as well. And that's kind of a new thing, I feel like, for organizations and businesses. And so many people, like companies, especially the chief HR officers I was speaking to, many of them in private and confidence to me, like they didn't know how to react. Or like part of our leadership saying, say nothing. The other half of our leadership saying, do this. And it was I'm sure you've been in many of those conversations with your leadership team as well, right? But we're all looking towards our organizations to see what their stance is, right?
We've been having this conversation for probably over the last 4 or 5 years, even before George Floyd. And I have been pushing the envelope around the organization's role in corporate social activism, is what I call it. Mm-hmm. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I would tell leaders that there's an employee awakening that's happening. Mm. And what I meant by that is there's so much going on in the world, and it's impacting people because they're either LGBTQ plus, or they're Black, or they're Latino, or they're Asian, or they're, you name it, or of different faiths. And it's coming to this crescendo.
Yeah.
And the issue is all of this stress is happening in our communities. And when we come into work, you're still expecting us to shrug it off and not think about it and just do the work. And, many businesses, organizations are like, look, we just focus on the business. We focus on the numbers. We just focus on that. We don't do that. I can remember when I first started working in corporate America, it was an unwritten rule. You don't talk about politics in the workplace. Yeah. You don't talk about religion in the workplace, et cetera. And fast forward to today, and that's just it's just crazy. And so I would tell and warn them, I said, this employee awakening is happening in the workplace, and you can't, it's like a ball rolling downhill, snowball that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. If you're standing at the bottom of the hill and you're trying to stop it, you're going to get run over. We have to deal with this. We have to help people to understand and create an environment where they feel comfortable feeling the stress that they have about what's happening in their respective communities outside of work and how it's impacting them. And then, I personally think that's why we see such an emphasis on emotional health and well-being, sure. Because for so many years they stifled it in the workplace, and now it's just sort of unloading, and we're seeing this. And so it's sort of like this perfect storm. And George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, the pandemic, everybody at home, and forced to sort of watch this because our only connection to the outside world was our laptops, our iPads, our iPhones, and our televisions. And so we were forced to see this 24/7, all the time. And so it caused us to say, okay, corporations to say, all right, there's so much going on, and employees are feeling like they can't talk about it at work. And is that what we want? And it's not, because, definitely in the Black community all around the globe, it sparked a question of, have you reached out to me, manager, leader, to see if I'm okay? Mm-hmm. And anything that happens, the atrocities that were happening in the Asian community, that happened in the LGBTQ plus community, the violence, all of these different things, it just brought on this new world. And so we have to make sure that we're creating that culture and that environment within the workplace where people they feel comfortable in saying, it's okay if you don't feel right today. It's okay if you're feeling a certain way. Let's talk through it. How can we help you? And providing resources and support to help employees through tough times. And then also, too, from the perspective of even the war on talent, we know that, especially Generation Y, Generation Z, that they are looking for organizations that have the same values and standards that they have as an individual. And so they're asking these questions when they're interviewing, right? And you're not just interviewing the candidate, they're interviewing you, because I guarantee you they have 2, 3, 4 other companies that they are considering. And And so from that standpoint of the war on talent, you have to also understand it. But it's not easy.
No.
What we have done is we put together a framework and a group of people across different disciplines to really consider different things that are happening externally across the world, and what and if the company should respond to it, and what it should look like, and who should be the voice of it, and should it be internal and external. So having that framework was a big step in at least being able to ask the right questions
and have conversations
around specific issues.
Yeah, you're actually having, it's interesting, right? Because none of what we're talking about is new.
Mm-hmm.
It always existed.
Yes.
And I feel like some companies and people I spoke to, like, they were kind of like surprised, like this wasn't already. I'm like, and that was such a shocking moment to feel like people, I think this is people have been feeling this way, living this way for so long. And it's, as you said, it was like that perfect storm, right? Where it can no longer be ignored. And if you didn't have a voice and you didn't say anything, it literally was costing companies their share price.
That's exactly it.
And then they finally woke up. I'm laughing because it's like so ridiculous that it took this to get us here. So there is a silver lining to that as well.
Also, Chris, what I don't know if you've noticed it. I'd be curious with all the guests that you've had. Companies, those statements of solidarity in 2020, and coming 2 years later, was it just a moment in time, or was it truly a movement where companies really moving forward? And in my space, a lot of companies started hiring chief diversity officers where they didn't have one. I saw
it, yeah.
And it was like, okay, well, they've hired it, check the box, but they didn't give them resources.
Nope.
They didn't really hire for the right skills and capabilities, all of that.
Unfortunately, I would say in most of the cases, it was a tick the box, unfortunately. And I saw just as many of those CDOs leave just as fast. And it was really upsetting to see, because obviously it was a moment where don't get me wrong, a lot of great things come out of it, and many, many companies have kept on that journey. So that's amazing. But I did see a large number of, I've spoken to, not even see your peers and colleagues and HR leaders, that kind of, it was just a moment in time. And by the way, they didn't want it to be a moment in time. The HR leaders and the CDO didn't want to go over time, but the business, if that makes sense, were not. Yeah,
we're not supportive. Yeah. And it's like it's funny because it's sort of like this concept of diversity inclusion. Like, oh yeah, I believe in it. I believe in the vision. I believe in it. And then it's like, okay, now here's the strategy. Here's what needs to get done. Here's the initiatives. Here's the hard decisions you have to make. Here's the trade-offs. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly, right. And now it's because they're no longer in the spotlight and they feel like they can get away with it. We're going to probably find ourselves, something else is going to happen. We're going to find ourselves here again. But those companies will be found out, like we said earlier, like they're going to struggle hiring and retaining talent. It's gonna affect them in so many different ways. We can go through a whole list as well. But on a positive note, I feel like we've made massive strides.
Yes.
To where from when I first started having these conversations to where we are now, if I look at it from that perspective, it's been like, wow, like we've come a very long way. Listen, last question before I let you go. Probably gonna be a tough one to give it a short answer, but what would be your advice for the CDOs of tomorrow? That are going to be sitting in your seat, or you've been on the journey, the highs, the lows, the good, the bad. What advice would you give to them?
I would say to the chief diversity officers, you have to stay relevant, understanding not just your skills and capabilities, understanding what's happening culturally around the world, and make sure you surround yourself with a team of folks that can help you to do that. Because you can't do it yourself, but you need to be relevant around the issues that are impacting different communities of people around the world. So staying relevant, and also staying relevant from a business perspective, understanding what's happening in your organization from a business perspective, is mergers, acquisitions, the companies, it's sort of like inviting someone into your family, right? Do they believe in this company that we're thinking about acquiring? Do they believe in diversity and inclusion? What's their culture like? All of those different things. So stay relevant around the different things, and especially politics. The political scene, it's got DE&I wrapped all around it. If any, it's just you got to stay relevant, and then stay supportive of each other. Have a network of other diversity officers and leaders that you can reach out to, get on the phone if you're having a bad day and talk about, commiserate with, because we're all going through it. You're all going to be going through it. And especially the diversity leader of the future, you're going to be pulled in different avenues where predecessors, years ago, diversity leaders, they were very myopic around representation, counting butts and seats. And you need to be aware of all different areas of the organization and where intervention is needed. And then, so you have to be supportive of each other. And then the last thing is just stay in it, stay in the fight. Don't give up. Don't have the attitude, I'm going to take my ball and go home if nobody listens to you, because there are going to be days where nobody listens to you, but you have to come back and keep fighting and keep intervening and keep having those conversations, no matter how many doors are shoved in your face, slammed in your face. You have to keep coming back, because not just for you, but for the thousands or tens of thousands, depending on how large your organization is, of employees that haven't found their voice yet. They don't feel empowered to be able to speak on behalf of themselves. They're depending on you to do it. And so good day, bad day, it doesn't make a difference. Speak on behalf of those voices.
I love that. And then last question, where can people grab a copy of the book?
Well, they can get a copy of the book on Amazon.com, any of the different bookstores as well. But the easiest place is going to Amazon.com. It's there. It's Kindle. It's also an ebook, Audible, as well as a hard copy. And then also you can go to my website, CRW, Celeste Renee Warren, CRWdiversity.com, and get more information as well.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the best until next week. I wish you all success with the book. Anyone listening right now, make sure you grab a copy of the book. It's for everyone, right? Again, like what you said earlier, this is not just for the CDOs or the HR leaders. This is for all of us. We all have a part to play as well. So yeah, keep up the amazing work, and I look forward to doing this again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for the invitation.